Oh, hi. Welcome to the Art of Creation show, the all new Art of Creation show with your hosts, Frank Fradella and Rebecca Jane Boswell. Rebecca,
Yeah.
I'm sensing some horsey business going on there.
Oh yeah, we're horsing around here today. I'm in Indiana, and yeah, on a horse farm. Let's see, this is what I'm looking at.
Wow.
Uh, some horses. We have some little calves over there, and let's see, we this is dark. I don't even know if you can see in here, but we have some tables behind us, and yeah, every year kids do an annual horse camp, and on the last day they get to do a performance or a show ride and do all the fun stuff and show us how they wash the horses and feed them and ride them, and we get to come and do that. So we are here today, and that's where our show is going to be filmed from today. And apologies, I see you guys, but I am very squinty with all the sun. So hopefully you don't mind me wearing my big fly glasses and my big bug eyes. And yeah, Frank, what is on tap for us today?
Today, we're talking about big thoughts, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Big, big thoughts. So, read an article the other day where scientists are now trying to prove that the universe itself has a consciousness.
Oh, it sounds kind of interesting.
It is kind of interesting, and what's interesting about it is that it's not a conversation about, it's not a philosophical conversation, it's a scientific conversation, which
Yeah.
that's new, right? That's the new part, right? It's not that people haven't posited before that the universe is aware, that the universe is alive, that we are part of one
Not
giant moving
easy
thing.
people like us, you mean?
Right, right. No, I mean, so this is going back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Like so it's so funny that this came around when it did, because I'm actually reading a book right now on Norse mythology, which is a like a little passion of mine. Mythology in general, but Norse mythology and Greek mythology in particular, little Egyptology in there. That's my jam. So I've always loved this idea of where we came from and what our thoughts were about the universe. And I just read the story about Odin, one-eyed Odin. Everybody knows Odin, I think. Many people know Odin. Everybody knows
The North,
Thor,
the North
right?
God.
Hammer guy. Thor's father is Odin, and he was one of the original gods. He's called the All Father because his actions gave us the universe as we know it and gave us the world as we know it, and everything in it comes from Odin and his actions, not from him. He didn't birth everything, but it was his actions that caused everything to come into being. And the really interesting thing that I found was that his father was an impossibly immense being named Ymir, and he slew his father to get, and Ymir's blood and sweat gave us the oceans and the rivers and the seas, and his body gave us the land and the blah blah blah. And the fascinating thing was that, like, at no point do they think that Ymir stopped being. Like, the Norse don't think that, like, Ymir died. Ymir just continued to live in a different state. And, like, this is the thing that blew my mind, because, like,
That means
Ymir's
multiple.
brain Ymir's brains are the clouds. So, like, every Norseman, every Viking would be walking along looking at the brains of an elder god and knowing that it was still thinking. And I'm like, this blows my mind, right? Like, this is how far back this goes, that the universe has a
What do you think
consciousness.
all the stars are made of?
Right. Like, what are the stars? Like, all of this stuff is, like, from the elder gods, right? And so, like, this thought now that we're coming back to that the universe is actually thinking, well,
Yeah.
welcome to the show.
Well, and it's really interesting too, because we even try to make, okay, so the universe is infinite, right? And then we even try to make the infinite finite in some way by still defining it and giving it sort of a box and parameters.
Yeah.
And even now when you do look at science, I don't know where I went. Sorry. I don't know if you can still hear me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. But now science is even saying that when you're talking about the infinite and you're talking about infinity, the question becomes, okay, well, which infinity are you actually talking about?
Right.
And that there's actually this concept of multiple, the multiverse, or
Right.
instead of just one universe. And so it's really interesting you're talking about this with with what happened, when Odin's father disappears. It's like, wait a minute. So if Odin is the creator of the universe, then what does that mean about what came before? What was that? And nobody ever really looks at that. And
Right.
it's like, oh, okay, so there has actually been information about this for a really, really long time.
A really long time, right? So, I mean, this is a conversation that the Norse have had tens of thousands of years ago. And like this thing where like Ymir existed in this kind of void space, right? Like pre-Big Bang is what we would call it, pre-creationism, right? If you're looking at like the Christian religion or mythology. So Odin existed in that space of nothingness. And he was like, well, this doesn't work, right? You can't do anything here. Nothing grows here. Like you have to we've got to do something to make something so that other things can come and other things can grow. And so he sacrificed his eye for the wisdom to know what to do. Because it wasn't information that he lacked. He knew all that there was, because all that there was everything there, which was nothing. What he lacked was the wisdom on how to change it. And so he gave his one eye, which is why Odin is blind in one eye, because he gave his eye in sacrifice. And then he had this awareness that like, oh, so that choice created an awareness. And where have we heard that before?
Yeah, and where actually creation is really, we've seen this in so many places, right? That if you can conceive it, it already exists. If
Right.
anything you can imagine is now real,
Yeah.
and then even, so what about the stuff that we can't imagine yet? It's like, well, it may not be real for us, and yet does it mean it doesn't exist, or is it just that we haven't conceived of it yet?
Right. So,
yeah,
so here's this really cool part that I've been looking at, because it's my awareness that more ancient cultures had a peculiar relationship with time and with their perception of it, which is why you had people talking about prophets, you had people talking about seers, you had these women living in caves who would imbibe stuff and counsel kings and everything, because they had this vision of the past and the future and the present that was kind of fluid.
All multi-present.
Right, all multi-present. So here's the fascinating thing. We're like scientists now, and I love how scientists are now coming back around to this, what was once just a mythological view of the universe, right? We're like, we don't necessarily think that the Big Bang was the beginning of something so much as it was this kind of loop space, right? Like we've got this space that kind of like the universe is going to expand and then it's going to contract and then it's going to kind of like a sock, like you pull it on one side and then you're going to push it through the other side. You just keep pulling the sock, right? But like it's just this continuous action of time looping. Looking at is this Norse point of view. Are you familiar with Ragnarok and what that is?
With what?
Ragnarok?
No.
Okay, so one of the things that separated Norse mythology from other mythologies was this concept of Ragnarok, which was their version of apocalypse. It's the end of the world as they knew it.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yep.
The Norse gods, which was fascinating, the Norse gods were brought into existence with the knowledge of their own end. Everybody knew how it was going to end. Ragnarok was going to come, and this person was going to kill that person, and this person was going to kill that person, and a giant snake was going to come, and Thor would fight that thing, and that snake would bite him in half as they killed each other. And like everybody knew how they were going to die. They just didn't know when.
Sounds familiar.
Right. So this whole concept of this loop, but at the end of that world, they were all aware that all of this would happen again. And it's like now we're talking like a pre-industrialized civilization that had this awareness that scientists are only now coming back around to.
Yeah. Well, and we see this culturally in, so many different traditions, whether you're looking in Africa, you're looking in South America, you're looking at the Mayan tradition, you're looking at um, even the Christian tradition. I mean, there are all of these elements that repeat themselves, and yet, anytime anyone finds a parallel, it's like, oh no, that's totally different. It's like, really interesting. Is it? And then when all these things do kind of overlay and start to look suddenly very familiar, it suddenly becomes a new a new concept. Interesting.
Guys, I've
Interesting how we
just
can.
thought of something. Well, is that yours?
What's what?
Is that yours?
Oh yeah.
Like when somebody says, "Oh, guys, I just had an idea." Really? Is that yours?
Really? Well, that whole concept of panpsychism, right, or psychicism,
Yeah.
however you pronounce it, right? That whole thing of like, this is all just one big psychic conscious unit, right? And that's something we may have talked about a few times, and looking at like, what is that? And oh, wait a minute, there have been traditions since pre-recorded history where there have been elements of animism, or like this rock this rock has an energy of its own. This rock is imbued with its own life force. This rock has, even if we're not using these words, a consciousness of its own. It's like, oh, interesting that you know thousands of years ago this was a concept in Japan, and now science is saying like, oh, wait a minute, maybe there is actually consciousness in all things, and what does that look like? And of course the languaging is interesting, because the languaging has all kinds of little squiggle coefficient signs and like all these numbers, and it looks very important, and maybe isn't, it doesn't have the same poetry as the story thousands of years ago, and yet the core information is very similar. So what do we like? So what is this, just entertainment, Frank, or what?
So here's my thinking, right? These are pretty big thoughts for guys who are basically just one step out of a cave, right? They've fashioned weapons out of stone and wood and like leather straps to like tie the wood to the and so they can beat somebody with. Like they're literally a step removed from a caveman. These are pretty big thoughts for these people. And my question here, that I'm not looking for an answer, I just like the question, is was it even theirs? Like we're looking at it from our point of view that like, oh, we're just returning to thoughts that somebody else has. Or are they being gifted the thoughts that we're having now about all of this stuff? And when we loop back around again at our Ragnarok, when everything is reborn and Odin slaughters his father again, does all of this just come back around and they're born with the knowing that took us thousands of years to return to?
Yeah, and I wonder. I mean, and I wonder, like, what does that offer us as well? In terms of the choices that we make, how we view the world, how we live our lives. I mean, what does that actually contribute if we look at this? Like, what is? We were asking, like, what is an infinite being? And when we start getting to these things of like, okay, so what is infinite, and are there these time loops? And it our minds. My interesting point of view is our minds are tempted to go into the what does it mean, and create the significance, right? That's what happens with culture, is we get a group of people together that live in a similar area, and we say, okay, well, let's all agree on a certain meaning, and let's make it significant, and let's use that then to control how we believe and how we act and what we do and what we be. And okay, really cool. And what's actually beyond that? And I wonder what we could choose in having more information, and not having all the form and the structure and the significance.
Right.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that.
So I love that, and I love this addition of this concept that we talk about in Access. Like you're not allowed to say I don't know, right? Because you do, right? Like if you're willing to acknowledge that you know stuff without knowing how you know it, you will suddenly find yourself in possession and have more of that available to you just because you trust your own knowing. And part of what I'm wondering now is, do I know this stuff because I've already done this before?
Yeah. And how much do we try to make it, it's like, I know it, and we make it ownership. And what if it's actually just part, if we're all infinite being,
Right.
is there really separation between myself, between this fence, between the grass, these horses, the people behind me, right? We create all this separation to create meaning of me and mine and them and theirs. And, look at all that creates. But if it's actually infinite, we all are actually one. Are my thoughts really just my thoughts? Are we just drawing from the past, the present, the future, and creating?
Yeah.
And like, what does that also point to us in terms of, like, when we're choosing the trauma, the drama, the misery, the heartache, right, the upset, like, for what reason? If we are truly infinite and it's all available and we all are one, doesn't that actually give us more choice than we've ever allowed ourselves to see?
Right. So here's the first thing that popped for me when I read that article about panpsychism, about the universe having a consciousness.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked on this show before about how we're all infinite beings.
Yeah.
So you have a universe full of infinite beings, and you're wondering if there's a consciousness somewhere in there. Yeah, it's us. Like that's right. Like it's right there. It's right there for you. And this just blows my mind that we're coming to the space where even our entertainment, like, I don't know if you've seen the show Sense8,
Oh, yeah.
but oh, right.
Yeah.
So like talking about how interconnected we can be, and looking at this universe now as a conscious construct, and how we as infinite beings occupy that same space. Of course we're conscious. Of course it's
Yeah.
conscious.
We're talking about quantum computing. I mean, we're talking about these things about essentially creating silicone and artificial synapses that are how the electrical impulses in our brain fire. And we're talking about doing that with silicone. We're talking about doing it with artificial intelligence. Well, how do we know, how do we know that this isn't already that, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
love
yeah, right.
sometimes with the Elon Musk, the whole theory of simultaneous, whatchamacallit, simulation. And that opens up a whole nother can of things. Um, but, you know, it's not just about us, right? That's where we truly get into that conversation about the oneness, right? Like, we try to it's not about us and everything else. It's like, we are everything else, and we are all of this as well.
Yeah.
And then what would we truly, truly, truly like to create with that?
Yeah, and I think that as you begin to acknowledge what you are in the universe and how big you can be, we talk about, if you can perceive it, you be it, right? So how much are you not willing to perceive? Because it's not that you're not it, you're infinite. So it's a matter of willingness to be it, a willingness to perceive it. And now, if there's areas in your life where you feel constricted, you feel closed off from something, now you can start to make a different choice, because it's not a matter of how do I get this here. You're already here. How do you acknowledge that? How do you open that up for yourself? And this has been blowing my mind all week. I'm so glad we get to have this conversation.
I read somewhere, now I can't quote whose paper this was, and they were talking about, actually, to call ourselves infinite beings in some ways is a little bit of a misnomer, because to be truly infinite, they're giving mathematical reasoning and justification for why that actually wouldn't work. But they're saying it's actually that we are with infinite potentiality or infinite possibility, meaning that we are as infinite as we actually choose to be.
Okay.
Which I thought was a really neat way of kind of, that for me was really cool. Because what that showed me was this thing of, like, I may not actually be in the infiniteness I have the capacity to be in all moments. And yet I have as much access to the infinite and to infinite change and growth and awareness and all that stuff as I actually choose. So I can be as finite and as limited and as small as I choose. And I can also go with absolutely no upward cap in terms of how much I actually choose to be aware of and to be in connection and communion with.
Cool.
So that was a little piece that I want to throw in there, because that was like, ooh, wait, there's a piece there for me that just kind of goes ding, 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 ding. And I want to put that little piece out there in case that is something anybody would like to play with.
Yeah, so here's your takeaway. Here's your takeaway tool from this week's show. The next time you feel, right? The next time you get bogged down in your feelings and you're kind of jammed up about something, you're angry, you're upset, you're frustrated, you hate this, you fuck that thing, right? Like all of those places, ask yourself, how big are you being?
Yeah.
Right? Like how small are you making yourself to feel that feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my favorite lines in Peter Pan, the J.M. Barrie story, Peter Pan, was that Tinkerbell was only capable of having one emotion at a time because she was so small. And only one emotion at a time would fit inside her. And I love that analogy that, like, how big are you willing to be so that those feelings don't make you small?
Yeah. Yeah. How much choice, how much space are you willing to be? And if you actually would be all the space that you truly be, what would that look like? And how would that show up? And what could you choose that maybe you've never allowed yourself to choose before? What else could you be aware of? And how much fun could you have?
I love it. Rebecca Jane Boswell, thanks so much for joining me today on the Art of Creation show, Big Thoughts.
Big thoughts. And hey, I'm really curious what other people watching this, like you guys, you watching this, as you watch it, like totally crazy? Are there parts of it that you know something about? Are there articles that you love that have offered information on this topic that you'd like to contribute to the group? So the Art of Creation show on Facebook, that's a great place to post questions, comments, share articles, your musings, whatever it is. We'd love to hear from you guys. And as always, if there's something that you'd like us to chat about, and if you want to join the lives with your comments live, we would love to have you. And how would you like to show up in this show? And what can we contribute to you through it? So yeah, Frank, so grateful as always. And I'm going to head back over to horse camp. And yeah, I wonder where we'll be next week for our next episode.
I'm excited to find out. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I have so much gratitude for you. Un bacio. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
See you next week. Be infinite. Bye.